When I turned 18, I was broken. Then I inherited a dog kennel, and what I discovered there taught me how to heal. If you've ever felt lost, or like the world had given up on you, this story is for you. Stick around and maybe drop a comment if it hits home, because these are the stories that need to be told. The day I aged out of the system was the color of a wet paper bag. It was a Tuesday in October, and the sky over the city was low and heavy, threatening a rain that never quite committed. I stood on the cracked linoleum of the group home's entryway, holding the single cardboard box that contained my entire life. 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of shirts, a worn copy of a book I no longer remembered reading, and a framed, faded photo of 2 people I was told were my parents. They were smiling, squinting into a sun I couldn't feel. My caseworker, a woman named Sharon, whose face was a permanent mask of strained sympathy, handed me a large manila envelope. "This is it, Leo. Your final paperwork, your birth certificate, social security card, and a check for $217. That's what's left in your state account." I took the envelope. It felt impossibly light, like it was full of moth wings instead of my identity. $217, the price of 18 years of state-sponsored existence. I didn't say thank you. The words felt like stones in my throat. For 2 years, I had been counting down the days to this moment, imagining it as a release, a grand escape. But standing there, with the door to the only home I'd known for the last 8 years about to close behind me, I didn't feel free. I felt untethered, like a balloon whose string had been cut, drifting into a vast, indifferent sky. Sharon cleared her throat. "There's one more thing. This came for you this morning, by courier." She handed me a different envelope, a crisp, cream-colored one made of thick, expensive paper. It felt heavy, important. My name, Leo Vance, was written across the front in elegant, looping script. In the top left corner was the embossed return address of a law firm, Albright and Finch, attorneys at law. It was postmarked from a town I'd never heard of, Northwood, a place that sounded quiet and green and a million miles away from the concrete and sirens of the city. I stared at it. No one ever sent me mail. Not real mail, anyway. "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy. "I don't know. It's addressed to you. Legally, we can't open it." Her expression was one of mild curiosity, a brief flicker of interest in the otherwise routine administrative task of jettisoning another ward of the state into the world. "Good luck, Leo," she said, her official duties now concluded. She gave my shoulder a clumsy pat, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt like she was brushing dust off a piece of furniture. Then she stepped back inside, and the heavy metal door clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. I was alone on the sidewalk. The box in my arms felt heavier now, and the 2 envelopes in my hand represented the entirety of my future. One, a pittance to survive on, the other, a complete unknown. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the block, my worn-out sneakers silent on the damp pavement. I had a reservation at a youth hostel for a week. After that, I had no plan. The world was a blank wall, and I had no paint. I sat on the cold plastic bench, and with trembling fingers, I tore open the expensive envelope. The paper inside was just as thick. The letterhead matched the outside. It was concise, formal, and it made no sense at all. It informed me, in dense legal prose, that my maternal grandmother, Elena Vance, had passed away 2 weeks prior. It expressed formal condolences. Then it stated that I, as her sole surviving heir, was the beneficiary of her last will and testament. I was to contact the office of Ms. Beatrice Albright at my earliest convenience, to discuss the matter of my inheritance. An inheritance. The word was so foreign, it felt like it belonged to another language. I had a grandmother? I had been told my parents were only children, that I had no one. Elena Vance. The name was a ghost, a forgotten echo. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring together. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, its doors folding open like an invitation to nowhere. I got on, the letter clutched in my hand, my mind a storm of questions that had no answers. What I was about to discover wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about a past that had been deliberately buried, and a future I never thought I was allowed to have. It was about a run-down property, a handful of forgotten souls, and the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. The office of Albright and Finch was on the 2nd floor of a red brick building that looked like it had been standing since the town of Northwood was just a hopeful clearing in the forest. The stairs creaked under my weight, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo the hollowness inside me. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and rain. A woman with a tidy gray bun and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a large wooden desk as I entered. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "I'm Leo Vance. I have an appointment with Ms. Albright." Her expression softened instantly. "Oh, of course, Leo. Beatrice is expecting you. Please, come in." She led me down a short hallway lined with framed legal certificates and into an office that was crammed with books from floor to ceiling. A woman stood by the window, looking out at the sleepy town square. She was tall and slender, with short silver hair cut in a sharp, modern style that contrasted with the antique feel of the room. She wore a simple black dress, and her face, when she turned to me, was etched with fine lines of both intelligence and a deep, quiet sadness. "Leo," she said, her voice low and calm, "I'm Beatrice Albright. Thank you for coming." She gestured to a worn leather armchair opposite her desk. "Please, sit." I sat on the edge of the seat, my cardboard box on the floor next to me like a stray dog. I felt grubby and out of place in this quiet, orderly room. Ms. Albright sat down behind her desk, folding her hands neatly on top of a single, thick file. My name was written on the tab. "I was your grandmother's lawyer," she began, her gaze direct and unflinching. "And her friend. I want to start by saying I'm very sorry for your loss." I just nodded, not knowing what to say. How do you mourn someone you didn't know existed? I was told I didn't have any family. A flicker of something, pain maybe, or regret, crossed her face. "Your grandmother's choices were complex, Leo. I hope in time you'll come to understand them. She loved you very much." The words hung in the air, so contrary to the story I had told myself for 8 years that I couldn't absorb them. Abandoned, unwanted. Those were the words I knew. Love was not. Ms. Albright opened the file. "Elena's will is very straightforward. She left you everything she owned, her entire estate." I waited. I pictured a small savings account, maybe a few pieces of jewelry, something to add to my $217. "She owned a property just outside of town," Ms. Albright continued. "About 10 acres. It includes a small house and a business, a dog kennel." I blinked. A dog kennel? The image that flashed in my mind was of a row of sad, barking cages. It sounded less like an inheritance and more like a burden. "She called it the Northwood Sanctuary," the lawyer said, a faint, fond smile touching her lips. She didn't just board dogs. She took in the ones no one else wanted, the old, the sick, the difficult cases. That sounded even worse, a collection of broken things. I felt a strange, unwelcome kinship. Now, we need to be very clear about the financial situation, she said, her tone shifting from gentle reminiscence to brisk professionalism. She pulled a sheaf of papers from the file. They were covered in columns of numbers and stamped with angry red ink. The property carries a significant mortgage. Furthermore, your grandmother had taken out several business loans over the years to keep the sanctuary running. The total debt currently stands at $184,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? The bank that holds the mortgage was bought out last year by a large development corporation, Stonegate Holdings. They have been aggressive. They see the land as prime for a new housing development. Your grandmother was 3 months behind on her payments when she passed. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. You have 90 days to either pay the arrears or satisfy the entire debt. Otherwise, the property will be seized and sold at auction. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a trap. $184,000. I might as well have been $1 million. I had 200. So I've inherited a debt? I said, the words tasting like ash. That's it? You've inherited the property, which is encumbered by the debt, she corrected gently. The property itself is valued at over $300,000, even in its current state. The land is valuable, Leo. So I sell it, I said immediately. The solution was obvious. Sell the land, pay off the debt, and walk away. Even if I only cleared $100,000, it was more money than I could have dreamed of. It was a ticket to a new life, a real one. Ms. Albright's expression was unreadable. That is certainly your right. Stonegate Holdings has already made an informal offer to buy the property outright, to avoid the hassle of the auction. They're offering $200,000. It would clear the debt and leave you with about $16,000 after taxes and fees. $16,000. The number was concrete. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was a used car. It was a buffer against the world. It was a way out. Okay, I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Let's do that. For the first time, Ms. Albright looked disappointed. Before you decide, there's something else. Elena left this for you. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small metal lockbox, the kind you might keep petty cash in. It was old and slightly rusted at the edges. She also produced a small, ornate silver key. She was very specific in her instructions. I was to give this to you and only you. She said you had to open it at the house, not here. I took the box. It was heavy. I shook it, but nothing rattled inside. The key was cold in my palm. My grandmother's last words to me weren't words at all, but a locked box and a condition. A strange, theatrical request from a woman I'd never met. A part of me, the cynical, practical part that had been forged in the group home, wanted to refuse, to demand she open it here and now. But another part, a smaller, more curious part I thought had died long ago, was intrigued. Why? I asked. Why did she want me to go there? I think, Ms. Albright said, her eyes holding mine, she wanted you to see it, to see what she built, before you decide to let it go. She slid a single, newer key across the desk. It was attached to a simple plastic tag that read, House. The bus to Northwood runs twice a day. There's one that leaves in an hour. A man named Gus runs the local taxi service. His number is on the back of my card. He can take you out to the property from the bus station." She stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "Leo, the choice is yours, entirely. You don't owe her anything. But I owed it to her to make sure you had all the pieces before you made your decision." I walked out of her office, holding a key to a house I'd never seen, a lockbox from a ghost, and the crushing weight of a choice I didn't feel equipped to make. The simple plan of selling and running was already starting to feel complicated, and I hadn't even seen the place yet. The bus ride to Northwood was a journey from one world to another. The city skyline, a jagged line of gray teeth against a gray sky, slowly dissolved in the rear view, replaced by sprawling suburbs that in turn gave way to wide, open farmland. The endless grid of streets melted into winding country roads, lined with trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the edges of the forest in strokes of gold and crimson. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape slide by. Each mile put more distance between me and the life I had known. A life of concrete walls, scheduled meals, and the constant, low-level hum of other people's unhappiness. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and a fragile, unfamiliar sense of possibility. For my entire life, my path had been dictated by others. Caseworkers, house parents, judges. Now the road was literally unspooling before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading to an unknown destination that was, for better or worse, mine. The manila envelope with my $200 was in my jacket pocket, a flimsy shield against the world. The metal lockbox sat heavy on my lap, a tangible piece of a past I was just beginning to uncover. The bus was nearly empty. An elderly woman with a bag of groceries slept a few rows ahead, her head bobbing with the motion of the vehicle. A young man wearing headphones stared blankly out the opposite window. The quiet was a stark contrast to the city's perpetual noise. Here, the only sounds were the drone of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement. It was a lonely sound. I thought about Ms. Albright's words. She loved you very much. It felt like a lie. If she had loved me, why had she left me to grow up in a system that grinds people into dust? Why had she remained a secret, a ghost, while I navigated a childhood of loss and instability alone? The anger was a familiar warmth in my chest, a shield against the more vulnerable feelings of confusion and grief. It was easier to be angry than to be hurt. After almost 2 hours, the bus pulled into the town of Northwood. It was less a town and more a single street with a handful of storefronts, a grocery, a hardware store, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a post office. It was quaint, like a movie set. I stepped off the bus and the air was different. It was clean and sharp, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. It felt like I could finally take a full breath. I pulled out Ms. Albright's card and dialed the number for the taxi service. A gruff but not unfriendly voice answered. "Gus's taxi." "I need a ride to the Northwood Sanctuary," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Elena's place? Sure thing, kid. Be there in 5. 5 minutes later, a dusty, decade-old sedan pulled up. The driver was a large man with a thick gray beard and a flannel shirt. He got out and looked me over, his eyes lingering on the cardboard box. "You must be Leo," he said. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in a town this size. "Yeah," I said. He loaded my box into the trunk without a word, and I got in the passenger seat. The car smelled like coffee and sawdust. Gus drove with a practiced ease, one hand resting on the wheel. "You're her grandson, then," he said as we left the small town center behind. "She talked about you sometimes." My head snapped towards him. "She did?" "Yep. Said she had a grandson in the city. Smart kid. Looked like his father." He glanced at me. "You do. Got the same eyes." My father. The man in the faded photograph. The man I barely remembered. The man whose debts, according to Ms. Albright, had somehow become my grandmother's. My inheritance. "I never met her," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. Gus just grunted. "Elena was private, kept to herself. But she was good people. Did a lot for the animals in this county. Took in any stray, didn't matter how beat up it was. Said everything deserved a safe place to land." He navigated a sharp turn, the road narrowing now, trees pressing in on either side. "Place has been quiet since she passed. Too quiet." We drove for another 10 minutes in silence. The paved road turned to gravel, and the car kicked up a plume of dust. Finally, Gus slowed down and turned onto a long, overgrown driveway. A faded wooden sign, hand-carved, hung crookedly from a post. One of the chains had rusted through. It read, "Northwood Sanctuary." And then I saw it. The property was nestled in a clearing, surrounded by a dense wall of pine trees. The house was a small, single-story, clapboard structure that might have been white once, but was now a peeling, weathered gray. Its porch sagged in the middle like it was tired. To the side of the house, a long, low building with a corrugated metal roof was connected by a covered walkway. This had to be the kennel. A series of fenced-in runs stretched out behind it, most of them overgrown with weeds. The whole place looked neglected, forgotten. It looked like the physical embodiment of abandonment. Gus pulled the car to a stop in front of the house. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of a distant bird. "This is it," he said softly. "Home sweet home, I guess." He helped me get my box out of the trunk and set it on the porch. He stood there for a moment, looking at the house, then at me. "Listen, kid, if you need anything, a ride to town, help with something heavy, you got my number." "Thanks," I managed to say. He gave a short nod, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving me alone in the quiet, overwhelming presence of my grandmother's life. I stood on the sagging porch, the house key feeling slick in my sweaty palm. The air was cold, and the silence was unnerving. I was used to noise. This place was holding its breath. Taking a deep, shaky breath of my own, I walked to the front door, slid the key into the lock, and turned. The lock was stiff from disuse, but it gave with a loud, grating click. The door swung inward, opening into darkness and the smell of dust and time. I was home. Or at least, I was at the beginning of whatever this place was meant to be. The air inside the house was cold and still, thick with the scent of old wood, dried herbs, and something else, something faintly animal, like dog hair and clean earth. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of pale afternoon light that cut through the grimy living room window. The furniture was shrouded in white sheets, creating a landscape of ghostly, lumpen shapes. It was like walking into a tomb. I dropped my box by the door and just stood there, in the echoing silence, feeling like an intruder. I pulled a sheet off a nearby armchair. The fabric underneath was a faded, floral pattern, worn smooth in the places where someone had sat day after day. My grandmother. I ran my hand over the armrest, trying to imagine her here. The image wouldn't form. She was still just a name, a phantom. I moved through the small house like a ghost myself. There was the living room, a tiny kitchen with yellowed linoleum and appliances that looked 50 years old, and a single, small bedroom. Her bed was neatly made, covered with a heavy quilt. On the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a book, left as if she intended to return at any moment. The closet was half full of simple, practical clothes. Denim shirts, thick sweaters, sturdy trousers. It was the wardrobe of a woman who worked with her hands. Everything was meticulously clean, just covered in a layer of dust that had settled since her death. It wasn't the house of a slob or someone who had given up. It was the house of someone who had simply stopped. I set the metal lockbox on the small kitchen table. The silver key felt cold and alien in my hand. Ms. Albright's words echoed in my mind. Open it at the house. I looked around the silent waiting rooms. It felt like the house itself was watching me. With a sense of trepidation, I inserted the key into the lock on the box. It turned smoothly. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, no precious object. There was only a stack of envelopes tied together with a simple piece of twine. They were addressed to me in the same elegant script that had been on the envelope from the lawyer. On top of the stack was a single, unsealed letter. I pulled it free. My hands were shaking. I sat down at the dusty kitchen table, unfolded the paper, and began to read. My dearest Leo, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the secret I have kept for 8 years has finally found its way to you. I know you must have so many questions. I know you must hate me. I need you to know that not a day has gone by when I have not thought of you. Not a day when my heart has not ached with the choice I made. I need to tell you about your father, my son. He was a good man, Leo, a kind man, but he made a terrible mistake. When your mother got sick, before you were born, the medical bills were overwhelming. He borrowed money. He didn't borrow it from a bank. He got involved with dangerous people, the kind of men who don't care about the law. He thought he could pay it back quickly, but the interest grew, and he fell deeper and deeper into their debt. After you were born, things were good for a while. He thought he was in the clear, but they found him again. They wanted their money, and they were threatening him. They were threatening your mother. They were threatening you. The night your parents died, the police called it a tragic accident, a single car crash on a wet road. But I know it wasn't an accident, Leo. I know they were run off the road. I could never prove it, but I know it in my soul. They were made an example of. After the funeral, these men came to me. They told me my son's debt was now my debt. They knew about you. They saw you as collateral. They told me if I didn't pay, they would make sure you disappeared. I had a choice. I could take you in and live in constant fear, waiting for them to come for you. Or I could let you go. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I let the state take you. I let them hide you in the one place these men would never think to look. A place where you would be just another number, another face in the crowd. Anonymous, safe. And I took on the debt myself. This property, this business, every penny it ever made, and every loan I ever took out, went to paying them off, to keeping them away from you. It was a shield, Leo. This place was your shield. I couldn't contact you. I couldn't risk them finding a connection between us. So I let you believe I didn't exist. I let you believe you were alone. It was a terrible, cruel thing to do, but I swear to you I did it out of love, a desperate, broken kind of love. The debt is almost gone now, but the company my son borrowed from went legitimate. They're called Stonegate Holdings now. They're the ones who want this land. It's not just business for them, it's personal. They want to erase the last piece of my family, the last piece of you. I don't know what you will do. You have every right to sell this place, to take what little money is left and build a life for yourself, free of all this. But I wanted you to know the truth. This land wasn't just a business. It was my promise to keep you safe. What you do with that promise now is up to you. Yours always, Elena. I read the letter again, and then a third time. The paper was trembling in my hands. The room was spinning. The story I had built my identity on for 8 years, the story of being unwanted, abandoned, forgotten, crumbled into dust. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection. It wasn't indifference. It was sacrifice. Every lonely night in the group home, every holiday spent with strangers, every time I had cursed my phantom family for leaving me, she had been here, fighting for me, in secret, in silence. The neat, orderly narrative of my life had been a lie. A kind lie, maybe, but a lie nonetheless. I wasn't just an orphan. I was the survivor of a tragedy far darker than I had ever imagined. And this dilapidated, debt-ridden property wasn't a burden. It was a legacy, a fortress built of love and desperation. Suddenly, a sound from outside shattered the heavy silence. A low, mournful howl, followed by a series of sharp, lonely barks. The dogs. I had forgotten about the dogs. I folded the letter, my fingers stiff and numb, and placed it back in the box. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I had to see them. I had to see the rest of my inheritance, the living part. I walked out of the quiet house and toward the kennel, toward the sound of the other forgotten souls my grandmother had left behind. The covered walkway connecting the house to the kennel was dark and smelled of disinfectant and damp concrete. As I pushed open the door at the far end, the barking intensified, a chaotic chorus of canine voices echoing off the metal walls. The main kennel room was long and narrow, with a concrete aisle down the center and chain-link enclosures on either side. The air was thick with the smell of dogs and cedar shavings. It wasn't a foul smell, just potent, alive. Most of the runs were empty, their gates hanging open. But in 3 of them, at the far end of the building, were the residents. In the first was a pair of beagles, their coats grizzled with gray, who yapped in a frantic, high-pitched harmony, their tails wagging so hard their whole bodies shook. In the next was a scruffy, wiry terrier mix, who stood on his hind legs, his front paws pressed against the chain link, letting out a series of sharp, inquisitive barks. And in the last run, the largest one, was a German shepherd. He was old. I could tell by the silver that frosted his muzzle and the slight cloudiness in his eyes. One of his ears drooped, and a long, faded scar ran down the side of his face, pulling one eye into a permanent, piratical squint. He wasn't barking. He was just sitting, watching me with a calm, unnerving intelligence. He was majestic and broken all at once. A small handwritten sign was clipped to his gate. It read, Odin. I walked slowly down the aisle, the barking of the beagles and the terrier following me. When I reached Odin's enclosure, I stopped. He didn't move. He just watched me, his one good eye seeming to look right through me. I knelt down, putting my face level with his. Hey there, I said, my voice quiet. He tilted his head, his good ear perking up. He let out a low woof, not a bark, but a soft, deep sound, like a question. I put my fingers through the chain link, my hand open, palm up. I didn't know what else to do. It was a gesture of peace, I hoped. After a long moment, he rose slowly, his old joints stiff, and walked to the gate. He sniffed my fingers, his nose cold and wet. Then he licked my hand. A single, slow, deliberate lick. In that one small gesture, I felt a connection, a flicker of trust that I hadn't felt from another living being in years. I found the food and water instructions on a clipboard hanging on the wall. My grandmother's handwriting was everywhere, a constant reminder of the presence that was now an absence. I filled their bowls, my hands clumsy and unsure. The beagles and the terrier ate ravenously. Odin ate slowly, with a quiet dignity. I let each of them out into their individual runs behind the kennel. The fenced-in areas were overgrown, but the dogs didn't seem to mind. They sniffed at the perimeter, rolled in the grass, and seemed to revel in the open air. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the yard, I sat on the back step of the kennel and watched them. The anger and confusion from reading the letter were still churning inside me, a toxic storm. My whole life had been recontextualized in the space of 10 minutes. My parents hadn't just died, they'd been killed. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me, she'd saved me. And this place, this broken-down kennel, was the price she had paid. What was I supposed to do with that? The easy answer was still there, dangling like a ripe fruit. Sell. Take the $16,000 Ms. Albright had mentioned and run. Disappear. Start over, truly free from the debts and dangers of the past. No one would blame me. Ms. Albright had said it herself. You don't owe her anything. Even my grandmother's letter had given me an out. You have every right to sell this place. It was the smart choice, the logical choice. It was the choice the old Leo, the one who had walked out of the group home that morning, would have made without a second thought. But something had shifted. Reading that letter, seeing this place, meeting these dogs, it had changed the equation. Selling felt like a betrayal. It felt like taking her incredible sacrifice and cashing it in for a used car and a security deposit. It felt like letting Stonegate Holdings win, letting the men who had destroyed my family pave over the last piece of it. Anger, hot and pure, surged through me. My father's debt, my grandmother's fight, now my choice. I looked over at Odin. He had stopped his slow patrol of the fence and was looking back at me, his head tilted. It was just a dog, an old, one-eyed dog left behind in a failing kennel. But in that moment, he felt like something more. He felt like a responsibility. He and the others were the last living link to my grandmother's work, to her promise that everything deserved a safe place to land. Was I going to be the one to take that away from them? The question hung in the cold, clear air. I had no money, no skills, no idea how to run a business, let alone save a failing one from a predatory corporation. The odds were impossible. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to take the deal, to be sensible. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a story that was bigger than just my own survival. A story of family, sacrifice, and a quiet, stubborn refusal to be broken. Staying felt insane. It felt like choosing to drown when a lifeboat was right there. But leaving felt like abandoning my post. I stayed out there until the sky was a deep, star-dusted indigo and the air was sharp with cold. I brought the dogs back inside, secured their enclosures for the night, and walked back to the silent, empty house. I didn't turn on the lights. I found the bedroom, pulled the quilt off the bed, and wrapped myself in it on the sheet-covered armchair in the living room. It smelled faintly of her, of that same scent of dried herbs and quiet strength. I cried. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was unloved. I cried for the parents I never knew. And I cried for the grandmother I had just found, only to have already lost. It was a storm of grief that had been building for a decade, and it finally broke. And when it was over, in the deep, profound silence of that house, a single clear thought emerged. I'm not running. Not this time. The next few weeks were a blur of overwhelming reality. The romantic notion of staying to fight quickly gave way to the cold, hard facts of my situation. I had less than $100 to my name, a house with no food, 3 dogs to care for, and a foreclosure notice that felt like a ticking bomb. The property was in even worse shape than I had first realized. A leak in the kennel roof had rotted out a section of the ceiling. The plumbing in the house was temperamental, prone to gurgling protests and producing water the color of weak tea. The fences around the dog runs were rusted through in several places. The place wasn't just neglected, it was actively decaying. My days fell into a grueling routine. Wake up at dawn, my breath fogging in the cold air of the house. Feed and water the dogs. Let them out into the runs while I mucked out their enclosures, a task that was humbling and surprisingly grounding. The physical labor was a relief, a way to channel the chaotic energy inside me into something productive. I spent hours just cleaning, scrubbing floors, washing windows, pulling weeds. I was trying to impose order on the chaos, both outside and in. I found my grandmother's account books in a drawer in the kitchen. They were filled with her neat, precise script. Page after page detailed the sanctuary's meager income and its staggering expenses. Dog food, vet bills, utilities, repairs, and then the huge regular payments listed simply as debt. Seeing it all laid out, the sheer scale of what she had been fighting against was dizzying. She had been slowly drowning, and she had done it all in silence. I made a trip into town, walking the 5 miles along the gravel road because I couldn't afford Gus's taxi fare. I bought a sack of cheap oats, a loaf of bread, and a massive bag of the most affordable dog food I could find. The cashier at the grocery store, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Martha, gave me a sympathetic look. "You're Elena's boy, aren't you?" she said. I just nodded. "She was a good woman," Martha added, slipping an apple into my bag. "This town misses her." That small gesture of kindness felt monumental. It was a crack of light in the overwhelming darkness. 2 weeks after my arrival, a sleek black car I didn't recognize rolled down the driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was slick and polished and looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of the peeling paint and overgrown weeds. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Who's asking?" I said, my hand resting on the handle of a rusty shovel I'd been using to clear a drainage ditch. "My name is Mr. Harrison. I'm with Stonegate Holdings." He glanced around the property with a look of undisguised disdain. "I'm here to follow up on our offer. $200,000. It's a generous price for a property in this condition." "I'm not interested," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Harrison's smile tightened. "Look, kid, let's be frank. This place is a wreck. The debt is astronomical. In 75 days, the bank is going to take it anyway, and you'll walk away with nothing. I'm offering you a clean break. $16,000 in your pocket. You can go anywhere, start fresh. Why would you turn that down? This was my grandmother's home, I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. It's my home now. He actually laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. This isn't a home, it's a liability. Take the deal, it's the smart play. He pulled a business card from his pocket and tried to hand it to me. Call me when you come to your senses. The offer is good for another week. After that, we'll just wait for the auction. I didn't take the card. I just stared at him until he awkwardly retracted his hand, a flicker of annoyance crossing his smooth face. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. The encounter left me shaken, but also strangely resolute. Seeing him, the face of the impersonal corporation that had haunted my family, made the fight feel real. It wasn't just about money and land anymore. It was about defiance. That evening, a new crisis hit. Odin, who was usually the calmest of the three, refused his dinner. He was listless, and when he finally stood up, he whimpered, favoring his back leg. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. A sick dog was a vet bill. A vet bill was money I absolutely did not have. I spent the night by his enclosure, talking to him, trying to coax him to eat, my mind racing. Selling the property would solve this. I could get him the best care and still have money left over. The thought was a tempting whisper in the back of my mind. The next morning, he was worse. He could barely stand. I knew I had no choice. I found the number for the local vet, a Dr. Aris, in my grandmother's address book. I called Gus and asked him to come, promising to pay him as soon as I could. He arrived in 10 minutes, no questions asked. Helping me lift the big shepherd into the back of his car, he just said, "Don't worry about the fare, kid. Let's just take care of the dog." The vet clinic was small and clean. Dr. Aris was a young man with a gentle demeanor and capable hands. He examined Odin thoroughly, his expression growing more serious. "It's his hip," he said finally. "He has severe arthritis, which is common in older shepherds, but it looks like he's had an acute flare-up, maybe from an injury. He's in a lot of pain." He prescribed a course of anti-inflammatories and strong painkillers. As he wrote out the prescription, I braced myself for the real blow. How much do I owe you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me, then at the paperwork on his desk. He saw my grandmother's name. "Elena Vance was one of my first clients when I opened this practice," he said quietly. "She brought me every stray she ever found. She never had much money, but she always paid what she could, when she could. She had an account here, a big one." He tapped his pen on the counter. "Let's just say she had a lot of credit built up. The exam, the first round of medication, it's on the house. For Elena." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over. Gratitude, relief, and a profound sense of connection to the woman who had, even in death, provided for me. Her legacy wasn't just the debt and the decaying property. It was this, too, a network of goodwill, a community that remembered her kindness. On the ride back, with Odin resting more comfortably in the back, I made my decision. The whispers of doubt were gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't just staying, I was fighting. I was going to save this place. I called Ms. Albright that afternoon from the payphone in town. "I'm not selling," I told her, my voice clear and steady. "Stonegate made an offer. I turned it down. I want to fight the foreclosure." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the soft rustle of papers. "Leo," she said, and her voice was different now. The professional reserve was gone, replaced with a warmth that felt like approval. "Fighting them will not be easy." "I know," I said, "but I have to try." "All right then," she said, and I could almost hear her smile. "Let's get to work. I think I might have found a few things in the loan agreements that could help us. Your grandmother was a fighter, Leo. Let's show them it runs in the family." Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was purpose. The path ahead was terrifying and uncertain, but for the first time in my life, it was a path I had chosen. I walked back to the sanctuary, the miles feeling shorter this time, the setting sun painting the sky in defiant streaks of orange and purple. I had a home to save. The decision to fight was one thing. The reality of the battle was another. My life became a relentless cycle of labor and learning. Ms. Albright was true to her word. She began a legal battle of attrition against Stonegate Holdings, filing motions, requesting documentation, and exploiting every procedural loophole she could find. She explained to me over the phone that the original loan my father had taken out was from a predatory lender that had since been absorbed by Stonegate. The paperwork was a mess, a tangle of acquisitions and poorly documented transfers. "They're counting on us to fold," she'd said. "They don't want this to go to court, where a judge might scrutinize their history. Our best weapon is time." So I had to buy us time. The foreclosure clock was still ticking, but every motion Ms. Albright filed seemed to slow it down just a little. Meanwhile, I had to make the sanctuary viable, or at least appear that way. I started with the most urgent repairs. The hole in the kennel roof was my first major project. I used the last of my money to buy a roll of tar paper and a bucket of sealant from the hardware store. The owner, a gruff old man named Carl, watched me count out my crumpled bills. He looked at the meager supplies, then at me. "That's not gonna hold for long," he grunted. "It's all I can afford," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. He disappeared into the back of the store and returned with a stack of leftover shingles and a box of roofing nails. "Found these in the back, taking up space. You can have them." He pushed them across the counter. "Elena was a good customer, always paid her bills, eventually." I was floored. Thank you." "Don't thank me," he grumbled, turning away to busy himself with a display of wrenches. "Just fix the damn roof before those dogs get soaked." That act of gruff charity became a pattern. When I was trying to patch the fences, a neighboring farmer drove by and dropped off a roll of chain link he wasn't using. Martha, from the grocery store, started setting aside bruised vegetables and day-old meat for the dogs. Gus would show up unannounced with a thermos of hot coffee on cold mornings. No one ever made a big deal about it. It was just what they did. They were honoring my grandmother's memory by helping her legacy survive. Each small act of kindness was a brick in the new foundation I was trying to build. In the lockbox from my grandmother, there were other letters. She had numbered them, and I decided to read one each week, like a serial story of my own past. Each one filled in more of the gaps. I learned about my mother, her love for painting, and her quiet strength. I learned about my father's regret, his desperate attempts to get his family out of the hole he had dug. And I learned more about Elena's lonely fight. One letter described the day she heard about the crash. "I fell to my knees in the garden," she wrote. "The world went silent. All I could think about was you, this tiny, perfect boy who had just lost everything. And I knew, in that terrible moment, that I was about to lose you, too." Another letter detailed her first meeting with the loan sharks. "They sat in my kitchen, in the same chairs you are probably sitting in now. They were polite, their voices were soft, but their eyes were like chips of ice. They laid out the terms of my servitude, and I agreed to all of them. For you." Reading her words was like excavating my own heart. It was painful, but it was necessary. She was becoming a real person to me, a woman of incredible strength and profound love. Her presence filled the small house, no longer a ghost, but a guardian. The dogs were my constant companions, my silent therapists. The two beagles, whom I'd named Pip and Squeak, were my morning alarm, their joyful yapping a surprisingly effective motivator. The terrier, Buster, was my shadow, following me everywhere, his boundless energy a constant source of amusement. And Odin was my rock. He had recovered well with the medication, and though his hip was still stiff, he had a new lightness in his step. We developed a ritual. Every evening after the work was done, I would sit on the back step, and he would come and rest his heavy head on my knee. We would watch the sun go down together, the sky turning from blue to orange to purple. In his calm, steady presence, the chaos in my head would quiet down. He had been my grandmother's dog, her loyal friend. I could feel her in his quiet companionship. He had seen it all. He knew the story. He was a keeper of secrets. I knew I couldn't survive on charity forever. I had to generate some income. The idea of running a full-scale kennel was laughable, but maybe I could start small. I made a crude, hand-painted sign and posted it on the community board at the grocery store. Northwood Sanctuary, dog walking and long-term boarding for the elderly or infirm. Reasonable rates. Ask for Leo. For a week there were no calls. I started to lose hope. And then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was an elderly woman who lived on the other side of town. Her health was failing, and she was worried she would have to give up her beloved old golden retriever. She had seen my sign. She asked if I could come and walk him 3 times a week. It wasn't much money, but it was a start. It was a seed. A few days later, another call came. A family was going on vacation and needed someone to board their dog for 2 weeks. The sanctuary, for the first time in a long time, had a paying customer. It was a drop in the ocean of debt, but it felt like a tidal wave of victory. I was doing it. I was actually doing it. I was earning money, caring for the dogs, and fixing the property, one rotten board at a time. The work was endless, and I was bone-tired every single night. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the exhaustion that comes from building something, not from just surviving. One evening, Ms. Albright called. Her voice was strained. "Leo, Stonegate is escalating. They've filed a motion for a summary judgment. They're trying to bypass a full hearing and get the court to rule in their favor immediately. The judge has set a hearing date for 4 weeks from now." The air went cold. "What does that mean?" "It means we're running out of time. I've delayed them as much as I can. Now we have to go before the judge and make our case. We need to show that you are a viable heir, that you are actively working to make the property solvent, and that the foreclosure is predatory. It's our last shot." 4 weeks. It felt like a death sentence. The small progress I had made suddenly seemed pathetic, insignificant. How could I possibly prove the sanctuary was viable in 4 weeks? The weight of it all came crashing down on me. The hope I had so carefully nurtured felt like it was being extinguished. That night, I didn't read one of my grandmother's letters. I couldn't bear it. I just sat on the steps with Odin's head in my lap, staring into the darkness, feeling the cold tendrils of despair creeping back in. The 4 weeks leading up to the court date were the longest of my life. A frantic energy took hold of me. Every task, every repair, every small bit of income felt freighted with immense importance. I worked from sunrise until long after sunset, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of desperation. I took on 2 more dog-walking clients. I cleaned out and repaired 2 more of the empty kennel runs, hoping to show the judge that I was expanding my capacity, even if I didn't have the dogs to fill them yet. The small community that had been quietly supporting me seemed to sense the shift in urgency. Carl from the hardware store sold me paint at cost. Martha started telling everyone who came into the grocery store with a dog about the nice young man who's taken over Elena's place. I read the last of my grandmother's letters the night before the hearing. It was short, and the handwriting was shakier than in the others. She must have written it near the end. "My Leo," it said, "I am so tired, but I'm not afraid. I have lived my life as best I could. My only regret is that I will not see the man you become. Whatever you choose to do with this place, know this. Home is not a piece of land or a house. It is a place where you are needed. It is a place where you have a purpose. Find your purpose, Leo. That is all I have ever wanted for you. Don't worry about honoring me. Honor yourself by building a life of meaning. That will be the greatest tribute you could ever pay." Her words were a release. She wasn't asking me to be a martyr. She was asking me to be whole. The pressure I had been putting on myself, the feeling that I had to save the sanctuary to justify her sacrifice, eased. Winning or losing in court tomorrow didn't define me. The fight itself, the act of choosing to build something instead of running away, had already changed. I wasn't the same broken kid who had stepped off that bus 3 months ago. The next morning, Gus drove me to the county courthouse. He didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder as I got out. "You got this, kid," he said. The courtroom was intimidating, all dark wood and high ceilings. I sat next to Ms. Albright at a long table. At the opposite table sat Mr. Harrison from Stonegate, flanked by 2 other lawyers in identical, expensive suits. He gave me a brief, dismissive smirk. The judge was an older woman with a stern face and perceptive eyes. Stonegate's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth and confident. He laid out the facts of the debt, the delinquency, the clear-cut case for foreclosure. He painted me as a naive, incapable teenager who had inherited a failed business and was squatting on a valuable asset. Then it was Ms. Albright's turn. She spoke calmly and methodically. She presented the evidence of the original loan's predatory nature. She detailed the sanctuary's history as a vital, if unofficial, service to the community. She presented my grandmother's account books, showing how every penny had gone into either the dogs or the debt. And then she called me to the stand. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The opposing lawyer's questions were sharp, designed to make me look foolish. "Mr. Vance, you have no experience running a business, do you?" "No, sir." "You have no formal training in animal care?" "No, sir." "And in the 3 months you have occupied the property, what has been your total income?" I had to say the number. $340. A ripple of quiet laughter went through the Stonegate side of the room. Mr. Harrison smirked again. $340, the lawyer repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you expect this court to believe you can satisfy a debt of over $180,000? My face was burning. I looked at Ms. Albright, who gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I took a breath and looked at the judge. "No, sir," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't expect to pay it off tomorrow. But I'm not just occupying the property. I'm rebuilding it. I've repaired the roof. I've fixed the fences. I've secured 3 new clients, and I'm caring for the 3 dogs my grandmother left behind. For 8 years, I grew up in places where you're just a number. The Northwood Sanctuary is the first place I've ever been where I have a purpose. My grandmother built it to be a safe place for things that were thrown away. I was one of those things. I'm not going to let it be thrown away, too." I finished, my chest heaving. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at me, her expression unreadable. She looked down at the pile of documents in front of her. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice sharp, "I have reviewed the history of this debt. The origins of this loan are troubling. The interest rates charged by your predecessor company were, frankly, unconscionable." She fixed him with a hard stare. "This court is not in the business of rewarding predatory lending practices, even retroactively." She turned her attention to me. "Mr. Vance, you have shown more heart and determination in 3 months than many people show in a lifetime. However, a debt is a debt. The bank has a right to be made whole." My own heart sank. This was it. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am not going to grant the summary judgment for foreclosure." A gasp went through the room. I stared at her, not daring to believe what I was hearing. "Instead," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "I am ordering a stay of foreclosure for a period of 1 year. Furthermore, I am ordering a court-supervised mediation to restructure the debt into a manageable, long-term payment plan at a reasonable interest rate, reflecting the principle of the original non-predatory loans in this region at the time. Stonegate Holdings will cooperate, or I will be seeing them back in this court for a full investigation of their business practices." She banged her gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." It was over. I had won. Or at least, I had won a chance. A real chance. A whole year. Ms. Albright grabbed my arm, her eyes shining. "We did it, Leo. We did it." I just sat there, stunned, as Mr. Harrison and his team packed up their briefcases, their faces thunderous. He shot me a look of pure venom before stalking out of the courtroom. I didn't care. The weight that had been crushing me for months had lifted. I felt light, airy, like I could float. As we walked out into the bright sunshine, I saw a small crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. It was Gus, and Carl from the hardware store, and Martha from the grocery, and Dr. Aris, and the elderly woman whose golden retriever I walked. They had all come. They cheered when they saw us. Martha rushed forward and gave me a fierce hug. "We knew you could do it, Leo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I looked at their faces, these people who were once strangers and were now my community, my allies. I thought of my grandmother's last letter. Home is a place where you are needed. I was needed here. I had found my purpose. The road ahead was still long and hard, but for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. I had a home, and I was finally, truly, starting to heal. The year the judge gave me was both a gift and a challenge. It was a shield against the immediate threat, but it was also a deadline. The victory in court wasn't an end to the fight. It was just the beginning of a different kind of war. One fought not with legal motions, but with hard labor, spreadsheets, and endless bags of dog food. The court-ordered mediation was a tense, drawn-out affair. Miss Albright was brilliant, calmly dismantling Stonegate's inflated claims and arguing for a fair valuation of the original debt. In the end, the principal was reduced significantly, and the new payment plan was daunting but not impossible. It meant that every single dollar I earned for the foreseeable future had a name on it. But it was a target I could aim for, not an insurmountable mountain. Life at the sanctuary settled into a new rhythm. The frantic desperation was replaced by a steady, determined grind. I woke up with the sun, my muscles aching in a familiar, satisfying way. The dogs were my metronome, their needs setting the pace of my days. Pip and Squeak's morning chorus, Buster's manic energy, Odin's quiet, dignified presence. They were my family. Word of the court case spread through the small town. My little hand-painted sign at the grocery store was replaced by a professionally printed flyer, courtesy of the owner of the local print shop, who refused payment. The trickle of business became a steady stream. More dog-walking clients, more boarding requests, people who were going into the hospital for a few weeks and had no one to care for their pets. A young couple who worked long hours and wanted their energetic puppy to have some company during the day. I had to learn to be a businessman, a role I was completely unprepared for. I spent my evenings at the kitchen table with my grandmother's old ledgers, meticulously tracking every dollar in and every dollar out. I learned about profit margins, overhead, and cash flow. It was a foreign language, but I forced myself to become fluent. I used every spare cent to reinvest in the sanctuary. I replaced the rest of the rotten fencing. I painted the kennel building, inside and out. I planted a small garden, like the one my grandmother had described in her letters, and the fresh vegetables supplemented my meager diet. The property slowly began to shed its skin of neglect, transforming from a place of decay into a place of renewal. The community's support continued to be my lifeline. The farmer who had given me the fence roll started dropping off leftover hay for bedding. Dr. Eris offered me a part-time job cleaning the clinic in the evenings for extra cash. He taught me how to administer basic medications, how to spot the signs of illness, how to properly clean a wound. I was getting the education in animal care I'd never had, not in a classroom, but in the real world. One afternoon, a truck pulled up, and Carl from the hardware store got out with two young men I didn't recognize. "Porch is an eyesore and a safety hazard," he announced without preamble. "These are my nephews. They need to learn how to do an honest day's work." For the rest of the afternoon, they tore out the sagging, rotten wood of the front porch and replaced it with new, sturdy planks. When they were done, the front of the house looked completely different. It looked proud. I tried to pay him, but he just waved me off. "Consider it a long-term investment in a future customer," he grumbled. "Now, you gonna offer us some water, or what?" Sitting on the new porch with these men, drinking cold water from a pitcher, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it almost hurt. I wasn't just Elena's grandson anymore. I was Leo, the guy who ran the sanctuary. I was part of the town. Winter came, blanketing the world in a thick layer of white. It was a hard season. The heating bills for the house and kennel were astronomical. There were days when I lived on oatmeal and coffee, pouring every spare dollar into keeping the pipes from freezing and the dogs warm. But there was beauty in it too. Waking up to a world muffled by snow, the only tracks in the fresh powder being my own and the dogs. Odin, his black coat stark against the white landscape, loved the cold. He would push his nose into the snow and come up with a frosted muzzle, looking years younger. On the 1-year anniversary of my arrival, I sat on the new front porch, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands. The sanctuary was quiet. All the boarding dogs had gone home for the weekend, so it was just me and my original 3. Pip and Squeak were asleep in a sunbeam, and Buster was chewing on a toy. Odin was lying at my feet, his head on my boots. The place was transformed. The kennel was clean and bright, with 6 of its 10 runs now regularly occupied. The house was warm and welcoming. The land was cared for. I was still deeply in debt, and I knew the fight was far from over. But I was making the payments. I was solvent. I was surviving. More than that, I was building something. I thought about the person I was when I arrived, that hollowed-out kid with a cardboard box and $200. He wouldn't recognize the man sitting on this porch. I had learned how to fix a roof, how to balance a budget, how to calm a frightened animal. But the dogs had taught me something more important. They taught me about resilience. They taught me about routine. They taught me that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, slowly and patiently. They taught me that love doesn't require words. Odin's head on my knee after a long day was all the validation I ever needed. My grandmother was right. Home wasn't the building or the land. It was the purpose I found here. It was the feeling of being needed. It was the quiet promise I made every morning to these animals, and to myself, that this would be a safe place to land. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending where I suddenly become rich and all my problems disappear. Life is still hard. The debt is a long shadow that will follow me for years. But the difference is, now I have a home. I have a community. I have a family of mismatched, furry, 4-legged souls who depend on me. And I have myself, the real me, the one who was buried under years of pain and loneliness. What I learned in this quiet corner of the world is that sometimes the things that look like burdens are actually gifts. The things that look like endings are really just beginnings. My inheritance wasn't the debt or the broken-down property. It was the chance to build a life of meaning, a chance to heal. It was a second chance I never knew I wanted, but I desperately needed. And I took it. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. My story is about dogs and debt, but I think it's also about something more universal. It's about finding your footing after the world has knocked you down. It's about the quiet sacrifices that often go unseen, and the strength we can find in honoring them. It's about realizing that the most valuable things we can inherit aren't money or property, but purpose and a place to belong. Have you ever had a moment like that in your life? A moment where a challenge that seemed impossible turned into your greatest source of strength? I'd love to read about it in the comments. This channel is a place for stories like these, stories about resilience and second chances. If that's something you want to be a part of, consider subscribing. Let's build a community where we can share these truths and remind each other that even when you feel broken, you have the capacity to heal, to build, and to find your own safe place to land. You're not alone. Thanks for being here.